Morning.
Morning.
Okay, a bit more energy. You all just had coffee. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, great. Thank you so much for joining us this morning in this session where we would like to discuss social enterprise, the entrepreneur, and the ecosystem around the entrepreneur. And, we just had a wonderful session with the founders of the Academy, which, as I was listening to them speak, I got
Thank
so
you very
excited thinking about the potential of this particular session.
Thank you.
And, one really could define social enterprise as innovation. Oh, we didn't consider this when I was being mic'd that I need to wear glasses. But I will work around it. That has significant proven impact on some of the world's most pressing problems. And when you think about it, I think they identified for us what they identified as the problem that they were solving. And so 10 years ago, a group of young dreamers sitting on a couch, as they told us, came up with this wonderful idea of this institution. And then they went about convincing a group of other people, all of us, I believe, who are in this room, to live and share that dream with them. And we're still, as was mentioned yesterday and again today, very much a community of intention as we continue to do this. And I look forward to seeing more and more of us joining this community, and we shall discuss a little bit more about that. My name is Ivy Mwai, and I'm here 10 years later. I am part of the founding faculty, as we called ourselves, or a moniker that was developed on this campus. I was in charge of admissions, predominantly in Eastern Africa. So I am responsible for many of the East Africans that have been through this great institution. And in the early days, some of the three very significant areas. I won't go into much detail because I know you all have the brochure and there's a lot of detail within that, but I will just highlight them anyway. In the Scholars Program, which is really to provide, has provided tertiary access to students from some of the most challenging communities to some of the top universities in the world. We've also worked together to make sure that these young African students are able to transition into great careers. So working, building the African Careers Network. And then, importantly, while we're here, the Anzisha Prize, which really is for young entrepreneurs to accelerate their innovations and their startup programs. And that leads me very nicely into introducing the people on the panel with me that we shall engage in on a bit more discussion. And I will leave them to introduce themselves, the organizations that they represent, and tell us a little bit about their organizations before we get a little bit deeper into asking them questions about them. So over to you, Cheryl.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola. Is my mic working?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was in an Aspen class with Fred when ALA was just an idea, and I've been a groupie for 10 years, so very happy to be here. So I'm here talking about an organization, a business, which I'm an executive director called Yellowwoods. And Yellowwoods is a business that has set, it's a holding company and an investment group. And it has set as its business purpose to grow business in a way that is a catalyst for significant and enduring positive change. And we think about doing that both through our businesses and the way they create shared value and influence and affect the markets in which they operate, and make the economy work in a more inclusive way through the way we do business. We also try and leverage our resources, our intellectual capital, our human capital, our business platforms, and all of our social partnerships to effect ecosystem change in a way that really creates an environment in which social system change can happen at an accelerated pace and at scale. And I think that the issue of an accelerated pace and scale is very important in the way we think about the challenge that we face on the African continent. The next 20 years really, really matter. We've heard about generations earlier this morning. We've heard about individual leaders as shapers of a generation. But there are some mega trends shaping this generation. There is climate change. There is an African youth bulge. We will have the largest, we will have 50% of the world's working age population will be in Africa by 2050. And we have the fourth industrial revolution coinciding serendipitously with those two megatrends. And when you put those three things together, you understand that we need to think about inclusive growth on this continent in quite exponential ways. We need to think about it in moonshots. I think we heard about those this morning. And we need to think at scale, and we need to accelerate change. So we think a lot about ecosystems. And we think about what creates tipping points in ecosystems and how can we help and contribute to, in particular systems that are either dysfunctional or broken, often because there are good men and women everywhere, there's capital and resources everywhere, there's often sort of pockets of skill all over the place, but things are fragmented, things are uncoordinated, things are not adding up, dots don't join, and we don't get momentum. We don't get scale. As my husband often says, the world is littered with successful pilots. And so the question we often ask is, and what we tend to do is think about systems or ecosystems where we feel we have some leadership leverage or we have some platforms, and we try and shape those ecosystems in a way that government, business, and social entrepreneurs can have their efforts sort of add up and effect change. I'm happy to share some examples. I think the two ecosystems we've been very involved in is youth employment, which is obviously a very, very central focus for the continent, through the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, which we incubated about 6 years ago, and also universalizing access to early learning, which we think is key to driving equity as a next generation comes through. The children of the young people who need jobs today need to have an equitable start in life, and early learning is very fundamental to that. So we take a generational view, and we're working hard on an ecosystem level to drive change.
I think I will, if that's okay.
In real time over the next
Is it okay to leave the necklace on? Okay.
Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Mensah. I'm from Ghana, but I live in South Africa. I am the founder and CEO of KISUA. KISUA is a fashion startup. I stumbled into it quite by accident. My background is actually in finance and technology. I spent several years in investment banking and then working for a Silicon Valley technology company, and then subsequently as a venture capitalist. And I was very surprised that in a continent with 1 billion people that's so rich in culture and art and fashion, that we do not have a single African fashion brand that's really known. We have lots of African designers, but we do not have an African Zara or an African H&M. Mm-hmm. Why not? There are 1 billion of us, and so many of you are wearing African-inspired clothing today. And many of you would have had to go find a fabric, take it to a tailor, cut a picture from a magazine, give it to the tailor with strict instructions. You come back in a week's time, and you hope that he's got it right. Why do we have to do that when it's not a special occasion? Yes, there's a wedding or a special ceremony happening. Mm-hmm. You want to get something special made, yes. But for everyday stuff, the way you walk into a Zara or H&M just to grab something that fits and you get on with it, why doesn't that happen with African clothes? Clothes are important. The 3 largest industries in the world are the 3 things that you do every day. food and beverage, because we have to eat every day. Energy, because you have to turn on the lights or cook. And clothing, because you have to wear something. It's not really acceptable not to. And yet in Africa, we haven't built an industry where we can clothe ourselves. And so, although we're a small startup, and we call ourselves a fashion startup that uses technology to solve some big problems, actually what we're doing is constructing an end-to-end value chain from scratch and a supply chain from scratch for an industry that doesn't have any. And in so doing, we are actually creating opportunities across the continent. So we've seen a problem, we're addressing it, we're sourcing from Africa, we source fabrics made in Africa, production is done in Africa, and we sell it all over the world. Our largest wholesale customers are actually in Italy. And so it shows you that African fashion is just not enjoyed and consumed on the continent, but with the right people, with the right systems, with the right processes, you can actually build a global industry out of nothing. You know, when I told my parents that I was leaving my good job to go and do this, they sent you to good Ghanaian boy, brought up in a good home. They sent you to good schools, and you worked in good companies, investment banking, Silicon Valley, and now you're going to become a tailor. You know, it's a complete mind shift. But here was an opportunity for us to effectively professionalize and develop an entire ecosystem for a product that we consume. And if we don't do it, it's likely going to end up in China, and our children are going to be wearing African-made clothes that are made in China.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, we can do better. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you. My name is Cheryl Dorsey. I'm president of Echoing Green. Ivy, thank you so much for moderating this panel. I'm so honored to share the stage with Sam and Nicola. And thank you all for coming. I wanted to go to every other panel that's happening concurrently with this one, so thank you all for coming to spend some time with us. So hopefully we'll have a very robust conversation. And this is really an issue that I'm quite passionate about. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit more about my organizations for those of you who had not heard of Echoing Green. We are a fellowship program that supports emerging social entrepreneurs. We've been doing this work for the past 31 years, and since that time have invested in over 750 social entrepreneurs, now working in 80 countries around the world. Increasingly, I think our strongest pipeline is coming from the continent of Africa. The talent amongst next-gen leaders, like a lot of you in this room, is really just extraordinary and prodigious, and we're quite proud of some of the investments that we've made in top talent on the continent, including Fred and Chris from African Leadership Academy, founder of One Acre Fund, founder of MyAgro, Farmerline, Waves Academy, and so many others. Just to give you a sense of the leverage of this very small seed fund, I'll share with you that each year we probably make only about 28 to 30 investments in new social enterprises, representing about 80 to 85 emerging social entrepreneurs. But these organizations receive just less than $3 million in support from Echoing Green. But again, the leverage is pretty extraordinary. Within 1 year, they have raised 10x our initial investment, hired 10x the number of FTEs or employees than when they started the fellowship program, and are serving about 2.7 million constituents within that first year. So the scope and leverage is pretty incredible. And when you look across the past 30 years of Echoing Green, we've only invested about $42.5 million in this collection of social entrepreneurs, but they've gone on to raise an additional $5 billion US dollars in additional public and private funding. So again, the leverage is quite extraordinary. We're also proud that about 70% of the organizations in which we invest remain viable and doing good social sector public good work. And even more important, about 80% of the social entrepreneurs we identify and support remain in the social sector, deeply committed to the public good. So I'm going to put Echoing Green's POV front and center, how we think about ecosystems and economic growth. You know, it's interesting that when you sort of really dig into the literature, there's not necessarily the strongest evidence that increasing the number of startups per se actually stimulates economic development. I think we'd have to dig in more deeply about the type of startups that are related and correlated with increasing economic growth. But I think the task and the charge for all of us who so deeply care about, Nicola, what you said, inclusive growth, we need to shift the definition and the terminology around economic growth. It really is about inclusive growth. And even though economic growth has been absolutely important for lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and improving the lives of so many more across the globe over the last 50 years, we know it's really just increasingly evident that a model of human development, you know, one that's based on economic, much more than economic progress alone, is absolutely necessary. So we're all only going to thrive as a society, only going to thrive in the 21st century if we begin to really think very deeply about fulfilling basic human needs. Sam, you talked about that. Equipping citizens to improve the quality of their own lives, protecting the environment, and providing opportunity for many of our fellow citizens who are not succeeding at the moment. And I really do like the model of Scott Stern and Michael Porter, who were saying that GDP is an indicator of growth and health of economies no longer sufficient. So things like the social progress imperative that looks at both social progress and economic growth is absolutely critical for how we build a thriving economy for all of us in the 21st century. So from Echoing Green's perspective, when we continue to talk about ecosystems, we very explicitly think about our work in the context of building mission-based economies. And for us, those are economies that are grounded and based in social impact, that are completely focused on driving equity in access to prosperity, access to education, safety, and that is the fundamental prerequisite to economic impact. So just wanted to put our POV on the table.
Thank you. And you've all touched, very much on, what's important around the ecosystem, and especially the fact that, social enterprise is really a human-centered, uses a human-centered approach. And considering that we're in an education institution, my question to you then, Nicola, would be, what role do you think education plays in building an entrepreneurial mindset so that we have, we're growing the communities that are, or young people that are interested in entrepreneurship and are going to be part of that greater ecosystem?
So I'm going to make a controversial statement.
Sure.
I'm not sure so much. I'm not sure that education is the answer to entrepreneurship in Africa. I mean, that does not mean that to build leaders of the economy and of government, we don't need the kinds of educational institutions that we're sitting in today. But when you talk about the billion young Africans who need to transition into productive economic activity, I think we overinflate the focus on education, and I think to our detriment. Our experience with the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, which now has 400,000 young people in its network, 50,000 of those have been placed into jobs, and many others have transitioned into other livelihoods in the economy. None of them are graduates. None of them went to good schools. And so the question was, and so many of them have dropped out of high school before the end of matric. Now, that's the challenge we have to tackle, is what is our innovation around understanding what competencies do young people really need to succeed in the economy, right? What are the actual opportunities in the economy, right? What does it take, if you take the value chain that Sam is describing, of making clothes, procuring clothes, selling clothes, export, import industry and the logistics around that. If we look at any value chain, right, you need very few graduates. And then, interestingly, nor does coding, right? Coding doesn't need university either, right? Now, that is not to say that these institutions are not important, but we have such a supply-side shortage that if we keep imagining this is the only solution, we will miss the 20 years that matter. right? Our young people, this generation will come and go. We will not fix the mass scale education solutions that exist in the 20 years we're talking about. So we need to think differently about young people's transitions from what we call learning to earning. And learning happens in many ways. Now, I'm exaggerating the point in order to make a point, okay? And I don't want to be quoted on Twitter saying education doesn't matter, please. But I think what I'm trying to do is say that when we think at an ecosystem level, when we think at the level of systems, and we think about hundreds of millions of young people being born, whether we like it or not, today, who need to develop cognitive capacity, who need to meet their cognitive development milestones in order that in 10 years' time, they can learn on technology that they will need to learn on to compete in a global economy, in order that they are able to be productively engaged in the economy, whether it's in making, we will still need clothes, we will still need food, and we will still need transport as humans, right? But how they work and what they work, we don't know, right? So I'm just really wanting to say that I think there are new approaches to accelerating young people's learning that we really need to focus on, and we need to focus on the transition from learning to earning.
Okay, thank you. I'll jump over to you, Cheryl. I read somewhere that one of your favorite quotes is, "Would you attempt to do this if you could not fail?" Expound on that a little bit for us.
Oh, that's right. Thank you for doing that research, Ivy. That's a Robert Schuller quote, which I think really sums up the work of entrepreneurs like Sam and so many others who cannot not do the work. And in the earliest days of the entrepreneurial journey, your only asset is your passion, right? And it is your shield, it is your fuel, it's the catalyst that gets you up in the morning when everyone is saying no, and you are the only one that believes in yes. So it is so absolutely critical, and you can't teach to that. I don't think, and I actually do agree with Nicola's controversial statement that there really just is no evidence that formal education around entrepreneurship leads to more entrepreneurs or more successful entrepreneurs. And there are scholars from Eisenberg and others who have sort of looked at entrepreneurial ecosystems that predated any of this sort of formal training. And it's really more about the ecosystems, access to customers, access to talent, access to capital. But I am a big proponent, which is one of the reasons I'm sitting here, in the power of leadership and the relationship of leadership to success at the helm of enterprises or whatever else. And Echoing Green has spent 30 plus years studying this. And, looking at leaders like Fred and Chris and so many others assembled here, over the past couple of years, we've gotten increasingly technical about codifying what are the sorts of leadership skills and competencies required to be a successful social entrepreneur. And we now have sort of come up with 10 competencies under which we think there are 10 skills that you should achieve mastery in to sort of accelerate your leadership trajectory. And I think that, at least from Echoing Green's perspective, is the model. It is about skills and competency building that sort of redound to the success of the enterprise. And I think that if we can start to think more broadly about the role in leadership development, skills and competency-based training, bless you. That's important not only for social enterprise, but for youth employability. And it's interesting, I don't know where the conversation exists here on the continent, but there's a burgeoning, very interesting conversation in the United States around micro-credentialing, right? And how do you take skills and competencies and provide young people with, badges, credentials to show that they're climbing the ladder of mastery, and how that redounds to either employability success or for enterprise success. And I think that's a really exciting development in this space.
Yep, it definitely is happening also on the continent. I know I've been in many forums where they've been discussing what they call it, competency-based.
Yes.
So at every level of one's life, one's education, you're going through certain stages and you're getting skilled to what's relevant at that stage.
Yes.
And possibly even graduating it into a workplace or into setting up your own business. Sam, last question to you is, we've heard from both Cheryl and Nicola, and we know that you're a young entrepreneur
Not so young anymore.
Well, young in the
Used to
business.
be.
You named your business as a startup. I meant in the terms of your
Okay.
business life.
Yeah, that's true.
And and I'm sure there are lots of challenges, along the whole system. We talked about, for example, the textile industry on the continent has suffered quite a bit because of imports or restrictions. Through that whole value chain, what are some of the challenges that you would want to point out to them to understand as a young person in a
Right.
startup business?
So to start answering that, I want to kind of touch on something that Cheryl said. I think sometimes we overplay the role of the entrepreneur because in order for the business to be successful, there's only so much that one individual can actually do. What is more important than what I do is what I'm able to inspire within the team, within the investment community, within my supply chain. What can I get them to do? How can I get them to think differently? And finding enough capable young people to bring into young businesses like ours is sometimes a challenge. Finding finding young people with the right kind of mindset to work in an entrepreneurial company. Most of them want to go off into a big company, buy a car and rent a place, and you say to them, hey, you know what, we got this really cool thing. It's called a share scheme. And they give you a blank look because in their world, they don't understand that actually taking shares could be way more valuable than going and working for Standard Bank today and earning enough to buy yourself
That car.
a car, right? And so creating young people who can be part of starting enterprises and be part of teams that build enterprises, I think is quite important. The other, talking of challenges that we experience a lot is in our industry, which doesn't really exist as an industry yet in Africa. There are really no formal supply chains. So you could have a cooperative of women in Ivory Coast or in Ethiopia who make the most amazing hand-woven fabric. How do I plug that in to a logistics chain so that that fabric from Ethiopia or Ivory Coast ends up at a factory in Rwanda and it's made and then exported to Italy and South Africa? And putting those nuts and bolts in place to do that is incredibly difficult in Africa. And sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot from a policy perspective as well to make the entrepreneur's job even harder. So we are probably one of very few companies that kind of building a Pan-African supply chain in the fashion industry. We would source fabrics from places like Ghana and Ivory Coast and produce clothes in Rwanda and South Africa and then sell them locally and internationally. Do you know that in South Africa, if I bring fabric to produce for production, garment production from Ghana or from Ivory Coast, the tax regime, the customs regime gives it no preferential treatment. It could as well come from China or anywhere else, but so when we talk about regional integration, when we talk about trade, we talk about, increasing business between African countries, there's some really simple things that could be done, which would really promote some of these activities. And so every opportunity I get, I talk about this because I don't understand why, African Union Summit after African Union Summit. And you go back into the archives of the African Union and you listen to the speeches given by Haile Selassie and Kwame Nkrumah. And so many years down the line, some of these really basic things like, just get this stuff to this place and don't charge your duties. And it doesn't exist. So those are some of the challenges we have building sort of ecosystems from scratch in Africa. And then, of course, in my particular industry, it's also very challenging because it's a challenging industry in which to raise capital. There is a stigma associated, for the most part, with creative industries. You know, these institutional investors don't look at music or fashion or art, at least not in Africa, as places where they can deploy capital and expect to make a return. You know, fashion in Africa is done by mostly uneducated tailors or very eccentric designers, you know, but it's not a serious business. Exactly. And so for us, it's, you know, we're actually a serious business. I mean, I could be asleep at 2 a.m. in the morning, somebody in Australia places an order, and it will get delivered, and it's all automated. And we've done this, and we've built this, and it's here in Africa. It's a serious business. It has, to Nicola's point, it has the potential to scale. In order for it to scale, though, institutional investors need to come in and say, okay, this hasn't been done before. Nobody has ever built a global, contemporary African brand. How do we do this?
Okay. I've seen a hand up which allows me to segue into, and then we'll come back to you,
Okay,
Nicola,
I just wanted to
into asking for some comments or questions from the audience. Sir?
Yes, hello, my name is Olympus Raptis. I work in the European Parliament in Brussels. My home country is Greece. I really felt related to lots of the things that Sam said about the policy making and also the education. I think, yes, indeed, education does not... Yes, I think, yes, indeed, education does not matter, but maybe if we could rephrase, a different education does matter. What do I mean by this? My country, Greece, for example, we had the textile industry. It collapsed, and we had one of the highest rankings in education. Everyone can afford, you know, to send, you know, their kids, you know, to public or private school. The problem is that we do not, talking about Greece, for example, and this is, I can assure you, it's the case in many other European countries, and not only. We do not teach our kids that they should fail. We tell them that they should not fail. How can you get them, you know, to develop, you know, the entrepreneurial spirit? We tell our kids that, you know, they should go work, you know, for a big multinational, for example, because this is a stable environment. And we do not teach them that, you know, they should, you know, require, you know, from the government to create the institutional framework, the regulatory framework that will be truly inclusive, so that everyone can have access to, you know, competition. This is the problem. If you would try to ship a product from Athens to Salonika, which is only 3 hours drive, you'd find that it's actually more expensive than to have the same product shipped from Canada to Greece. Wow. Why? Okay. Because the professions in Greece are not liberalized, because there is a lot of corruption in the system, chronic capitalism and all that. So how do you get, you know, the kids, because this is where it all starts, you know, to understand that it's not just about the great idea. And this is how, you know, I can congratulate Sam. Most people come to Sam and they say, oh, great, you know, you had this great idea. And very few people, correct me if I'm wrong, go and ask Sam, how did you manage to overcome the regulatory environment? How did you manage, you know, to create a supply chain across a network of countries that is not conducive to allowing you necessarily to build this seamless supply chain? So it's a miracle in a way.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Comments from students?
Hi, my name is Milani Smuts. I'm the founder of an organization called Streetlight Schools that works on sort of high quality primary education in the inner city. I can relate very deeply to what everyone on stage has said, and I guess the major question, and I don't have an answer, I'm left with is there's this deep tension between the desire to reach and to innovate and to change, and the fundamental social justice aspect of education, which is equitability and equality. And it pains me very deeply that we can sit here today actually in this country where we have a 78% illiteracy rate, okay, and at the same time have these extraordinary conversations and a 78% illiteracy rate, and it hurts me. And I wonder, and I think it connects to what you're saying, because if you had a competent bureaucracy, then a lot of your issues would be addressed. And I think if we had sort of stable parenting homes and access to decent jobs and very ordinary things, so many of these injustices could also be addressed. And how do we reconcile this deep tension between lifting the collective and reaching for the sublime?
Thank you. We have another question. I hope someone is noted that may want to answer it. And then I'm hoping one of the students will also ask a question. Great, okay.
My
So-
name is David, and I spent most of my life running nonprofit organizations in the United States. I'm a volunteer at ALA now, and it is not lost on me that the 4 founders of this brilliant academy are all men. And when we think about entrepreneurship in the world, and we think about entrepreneurial leaders, we more easily can name the men than we can the women. And I'm wondering how you think about just as the intentionality of ALA to create the next generation of African leaders. As investors, as entrepreneurs yourselves, how do you think about promoting entrepreneurship so that women have at least an equal place at the table?
Thank you. And then yours will be the last one.
Good morning. My name is Asma. I'm from Morocco, and I'm second-year student here. 2 months ago, I started my social enterprise where I am helping a woman in a village in Morocco sell her, sell Moroccan dresses internationally. So she makes really good dresses, high quality, yet no one buys from her in her village. What I'm doing is I'm that bridge to her. One of the obstacles I'm facing right now is delivering, getting the merchandise from Morocco to, for example, South Africa. It costs a lot of money. So I would like to ask you how I can face this problem and not let it be an obstacle.
Okay. And the last question from there.
Hello, my name is Akwa Orsot from Ivory Coast, and I'm also a second year here at the African Leadership Academy. My question is kind of directed to what Mr. Sam talked about regarding capital and investment. We forgot that as a young entrepreneur, and there is some distinction between your experience and a young entrepreneur because you don't have capital at the very beginning. You're very new to that experience, and you don't know that many people who can help you move forward in your journey. So on that level, what would be your advice for a person who is very young, like me, like 17, 18, and is really passionate about entrepreneurship, but really want to realize this dream?
Thank you. So in the interest of time, and I'd like to sort of divide the 3 questions among you. Who will take on the gender lens question?
I'm happy
And
to
Sam, I think you may want to take to help the
Yeah,
young lady with the idea from
yeah.
Morocco. Nicola,
I'll
the
make a
question
general
on
comment
inclusive.
next.
Okay, great, thank you. So go ahead, whoever starts.
I'm happy to start with the question
Okay.
because I do think entrepreneurship is, like all sectors, is confronting key equity issues. I mean, we all know the statistics about how people of color, women, and indigenous leaders are locked out of capital markets, and the data doesn't lie, and it's consistent over time. I do think there is a combination of bias in the system that has to be really robustly and actively hacked. I think there's also sort of a framing and energy around entrepreneurship that has been masculinized. I've totally made up that word, but it has shown up in a way that women, who are often sort of the strongest, fiercest candidates in our pipeline, are getting lost in the system. And I will say that Echoing Green, which had a long history of having really terrific gender parity in our pipeline, as social entrepreneurship began to gain mind share and penetrate the public consciousness, we saw a drop in the number of women who were getting through our pipeline. And it was consistent and incredibly disturbing. So a couple of years ago, we did a couple of things, because the same thing was happening to people of color in our system, where we moved to a blind early screening process so people's skills and talents and vision could come through, irregardless of pedigree, name, gender, race, all that kind of stuff. We also did some work with the folks who vet our business plans, did some anti-bias training for folks so that they could leave their biases at the table and be more mindful in the process. And I think the last hill we're starting to climb is how do you sort of hack the bias that locks a particular populations out of the capital chains, and that is incredibly difficult. At least in the United States, the vast majority of new businesses are being started by African American women. They get less than 0.2% of venture capital dollars in our country. It is just a disgrace. So again, there is a real disconnect. A lot of it has to do with bias. A lot of it has to do with lack of access to networks. And you know, this young lady who's so passionate about entrepreneurship, I bet when you looked at your network relative to a lot of men who are starting, we don't have the same access. So there's some intentional work that we all have to do about building more intentional communities to support one another. It's a small step, but it's the step we all have to begin to take.
Thanks, Cheryl.
I just want to add to that. So David, so my personal view on this issue is that just like racism is not a black or a white problem, racism is a societal problem. It needs to be top of mind for everyone, and we are all part of, finding solutions to it. I think it's the same thing with the gender inequities that you see, not just with entrepreneurship, but across, business in general. And I think for us as men, we need to be asking ourselves the question, this is a societal problem. We have sisters, we have daughters, we have mothers, so this is our problem too. And what are we doing as business people, as entrepreneurs, to support other entrepreneurs? So in our business, for example, we use a lot of female suppliers. And we actually, on average, you get better service from a woman-owned business than you do a male-owned business. They're more sensitive to your needs as a customer. So I think part of the problem is we as men need to become more involved in admitting that this is not a women's problem. This is a societal problem that affects us, and we should also be part of the solution.
Thank you.
Then to
Make
the
it
gentleman,
real quick,
the gentleman from Greece's point, absolutely. Policy, we score a lot of own goals there. I actually, my personal views that I don't think we should even have countries in Africa. I think that too many countries is unnecessary admin. It's really not necessary. Really, the only thing we need countries for is so we can play football against each other. Aside from that, there's no need. There's really no need. It just creates a lot of unnecessary administrative difficulties for tourism, for business, for just general travel. So I'm a big fan of integration. And then the question around supply chains and logistics. So here's the thing. There are millions of people like you and like the women that you mentioned in Morocco who have got amazing things to sell, but it's too expensive. Okay.
We're wrapping up.
But it's too expensive to send out those single shipments. What needs to happen is there needs to be an aggregation of all of those. There are probably, let's say, 200 women like that in Morocco who could be selling things to South Africa. If DHL had a program, I'm just picking on them, but if DHL had a program that allowed Moroccan traders to sell more easily into South Africa, that would significantly break down the cost. So these are some of the conversations that are happening now. You're probably only going to see the fruits of that in the next 3 to 5 years. But you are right; it's a big problem, and if we're going to improve trade, we have to do that.
Thank you, sir. Please, because Gavin's been in with the drum, we have to close up.
So just building on that, I suppose when we think about ecosystems, even when we aggregate, I think that we mustn't underestimate the leadership challenge we have at DHL. I'm not picking on DHL. I'm using them as an example.
Right.
There are large economic and political interests that are at play in the systems we're talking about. And unless we have a leadership and multi-sector approach to some of these problem-solving things, so it takes all of us. It takes a village to make this child, which is Sam's business, right? Because, and not just Sam's business, but Sam's supply chain, and this value chain that might be an African value chain. And I think that, so I just want to really stress the importance of leadership in the corporate sector and of the role that larger corporates in these value chains, in these, whether it be logistics, whether it be the off-takers, whether it be those that can influence policy, they also have to step up and play roles. And then there needs to be, people and champions in government who have the absorptive capacity or the will to respond. And so I just want to stress the importance of us not, perhaps a different lens, or not overburdening individual entrepreneurs as if they are going to be a magic wand. I think we need to see the leadership challenge more broadly.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everyone. As you can see, this clearly is a very interesting topic for discussion, and I urge you and I encourage you to find our panelists in the course of the day and perhaps discuss things a little bit further with them. I thank you for your attention, for your questions, and we now free you to go and have a cup of tea, move into the next session.